Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. And this is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my phenomenal co-host, Maricella Herrera. Maricella, I know we're just coming off of Mobilize Women Week. It was amazing. To our listeners today, if you were unable to make it, don't worry about it because we will be doing some replays on the podcast in the coming weeks and months. But how are you feeling, Maricella? Because I know that this was a lot of blood, sweat, and tears on your end. It's a passion project for you that you're just so committed to. And I'm wondering how you're feeling.
I need a nap. But besides that, no, I'm actually very tired, but I'm very happy with what we accomplished through Mobilize Women. And I say this every year, but to me, us having these conversations on topics like, is gender a social construct? How do we keep power accountable? How do we create a world that is anti-racist? It reminds me why we do what we do. It's an injection of energy for as much as it is also, a drain of energy to put it together. But I think it went really well. I think the conversations were inspiring, reassuring that there are people who want to make the world a better place and that are open to uncomfortable conversations that can actually have an impact. So I'm tired. I'm grateful. It's one of those things where I say, like, wow, this is my job. Like, this is something I get to do. So I'm happy.
Well, our guest today, Dr. Hilary Link, she and I actually talked about this because in her role as first female president of Allegheny College, she thinks a lot about the future of work, about how she supports her community of students and arms them with the tools and resources needed to succeed in the workplace and the world. And when we do Mobilize Women, it's open for all, women in the workplace predominantly, and allies and advocates. But I think it's a continuation of that, showing up, being a great boss, a great leader, a great teammate and colleague. The work is never done. And we tend to focus those conversations on some of the hard and soft skills, if you can manage a P&L or if you know how to negotiate. But what we create at Mobilize Women is about how you show up as a human and the way that you go beyond that professional label into something that's much more meaningful and much more impactful.
Yeah, it really, I mean, I don't know. If the last year has told us something, right, is that the personal and the professional, the lines are blurred. And the more I think about what I got from Mobilize Women, and I would say my biggest takeaway is something that is so simple, but also so important, which is we're first and foremost humans. And as humans, we have to be kind. So simple, yet so hard.
Yeah. It shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't. But yes. So, well, thank you, Maricella, for all that you did to make it happen. And now let's get to my phenomenal conversation with Dr. Hilary Link and talk about the ways in which she is helping to support these conversations as well. Hilary, it is such an honor to have you here with us today on the Ellevate podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
As am I. I am incredibly passionate about education and about the leaders who are taking education to the next level and helping to prepare leaders for tomorrow. And so I cannot wait to dive into this conversation, but wanted to start it off learning a little bit more about you. So Dr. Link, would you mind sharing a bit about who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Certainly. So I am Hilary Link. I am the 22nd president of Allegheny College in Meadville, Pennsylvania. Allegheny's been around since 1815, and believe it or not, I am the first female president that the college has ever had. So that's been the past 2 years. And I will say the past 2 years, obviously, with the intersecting global challenges that we've faced, have not been the first 2 years of my presidency that I might have expected. But they have provided some, I would say, unanticipated both challenges and also opportunities. So, as a background, I am a scholar of Renaissance Italian art and literature. I grew up in Massachusetts, but have moved all over the country and also the globe. And before I came to Meadville, my family and I had lived 5.5 years in Rome, Italy, where I was the dean of Temple University's global campus there. So I come to the presidency, I would say, from perhaps a slightly untraditional path, but one that really does inform my leadership style and my view on the world.
I went to Villanova University, so have a affinity, of course, for fellow Pennsylvania schools. So it's wonderful to meet you. I mean, I'm curious, as we think about your path, is this something that did you aspire to this role? Was this something you thought about, or how did you get here?
So it's an interesting question, and one that I obviously get asked a fair amount, but especially because I feel like my path to get here has not been completely linear. And somebody told me years and years ago, and I often think back to this, that it is much easier to connect the dots looking backwards than it is as you're in the process of creating a pathway. And I think in my case, that is really true. Fundamentally, I had the great fortune, both in college and beyond, to have been given the ability to follow my passion. So, first, to find a passion, which I would say I found while I was in college. I spent my junior year, I was an undergraduate at Stanford. I spent my junior year studying in Florence, Italy, and really completely shifted my whole view of my place in the world, who I was when I didn't have the cultural context that I was so used to from growing up. And it just opened my eyes to so many things, in addition to making me fall in love with the Italian language, literature, art, culture, etc. And so from there, I went on to get a doctorate in Italian literature, which really was my passion, but realized pretty early on that I didn't want to only be a research or teaching based academic, that there was also this organizational side of me that I really needed to integrate. And so moved into higher ed administration, and kind of things just evolved from there. And, there was not a moment where somebody said to me, you should be a college president, and I'm going to take you under my wing and show you how to do that. I think things just happened and they evolved. And I did have a series of mentors that taught me and, engaged me and showed me new opportunities. But a lot of this was just me thinking, that would be a next great opportunity. That would be a next great opportunity. And then when I was in Italy and realized I really was running a mini college or university, being in charge of the campus there, that I thought, I think I could do this. But it took a lot of, I would say, kind of guts and getting over my own sense of whether that was too precocious to say, no, I believe that I could be a college president.
Yeah, I love that phrase about, it's easier to connect the dots looking backwards, but it's also about living in the moment and, in real time seeing and experiencing what you like to do, what you don't like to do, what excites you, and then where does that take you next, right? Because we spend so much of our lives kind of trying to plan far out. But you don't know what you don't know until you just try things and then, see where the next step is.
Well, and I think if the past year and a half have taught us anything, it's that we really don't know what's coming down the road. And so I think, if anything, it has reinforced my desire to both share my story, but also really encourage, whether it's Allegheny students or any young people, that the best thing you can do is figure out what you really love, and then new opportunities will evolve from that. But if we thought before the past 2 years that we could plan our lives in a very clear fashion, I think we've all learned that we really can't. And so the best thing you can do is find what you love and do it.
Well, and talk to me about what it's been like to lead during this time. You became not only the first female president of Allegheny College, but you started in 2019, right a couple months before the world
Yes.
turned on its head, and particularly with colleges. I mean, that was a prominent storyline in the news. What would this experience be like for students, and the economics of it, the risks. I mean, it was a very, very nuanced and complicated story, and I'm sure leading during that time was quite a challenge.
That is absolutely, it's a bit of an understatement. Again, because when I began in July of 2019, I knew there would be challenges ahead, because the reality is the landscape of higher education is changing rapidly. We've known that for quite some time. There are demographic challenges, there are financial challenges, there are sort of value proposition challenges that have come up again and again. Of why would you, especially with a small residential liberal arts college. So I was excited to jump in to really thinking through, how do we better tell the story of the value proposition of an interdisciplinary liberal arts degree. But then 7 months after I arrived, and I spent the first 7 months running around the country trying to meet alumni and talking to faculty. I had individual conversations with all of our faculty and as many students and staff as I could. And then everything ground to a halt on about March 10th. And so it's really interesting for me, because my presidency has been mainly the past year and a half of global challenge. And I think on college campuses, it's really important to remember it's not just the global pandemic. There is, as you point out, financial challenges, the racial reckoning and social justice issues that have really been active on our campuses. Where we are in Northwest Pennsylvania, there was also a lot of political divide around the election. So I feel like we've had a little bit of everything. But it's actually interesting, because my approach to the world is all about the fact that and even more so now, you can't just have one expertise or one area of knowledge that is going to help you solve all of these really complicated problems. And the past year and a half just really reinforced that. You kind of need to pull together lots of experts with different expertise. You need to trust both your instinct, but also the fact that you can't be everything. I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm an Italian literature scholar, but my Italian Renaissance literature background taught me that you have to look at things from multiple perspectives. So I pulled in epidemiologists, and I pulled in risk management people, and I pulled in economic experts, and all kinds of people. And we really worked this through in a very collaborative, iterative fashion.
What about your peers, other college presidents who are navigating this time? And I ask that question because it's something we've seen a lot at Ellevate Network over the past year. Is leading can be lonely, and especially leading during a time of uncertainty and unknowns can feel very isolating. Looks like everyone's kind of looking at you for the answers, and the answers aren't clear. Did you have, peers that you could lean on during this time that helped you navigate it?
I did. And, you're absolutely right. Everyone says leadership is lonely, but the past, this experience since I arrived has been so lonely because you're absolutely right. The anxiety, the frustration, the anger that people are feeling at the world, right? And at systems and at institutions was very easy to kind of target at one person, let's say the leader of an institution, and people really have been seeking certainty. And it's the one thing that we know there is none of in this moment. And so having a bunch of cohorts of peer presidents, both ones like me who were in the initial phases of our presidencies, but then also presidents who have been in the job longer, right, who had already established who they were within their institutions and their communities before this happened, learning from them and just being able to contact them and say, oh my goodness, what do I do? Was incredibly helpful. To be frank, one of the really helpful things that one of my mentor college presidents, who's been in the job for 7 years, said to me is just remember, even though I've been doing this for 5 years before it started, I've never seen anything like this. So it was really helpful to kind of talk through issues because even though every college or university faced really different issues based on, who their community is, the size of the institution, what their local community was doing, the reality is there was a lot of consistency of just these previously unthinkable challenges that we were being forced to make decisions on pretty much on the fly, learning as we were going.
Yeah, I can't even imagine how that took shape for you. And you mentioned earlier on, I mean, the school has been around for some time. You are the first, I'm guessing that the first. Maybe I know there's been previous pandemics, but one of the first leaders leading through a pandemic, the first female president. How are you approaching this in terms of making your mark? You also mentioned you kind of, it took some time to feel confident in like, yes, I can do this, and to know that this was, the right next step. What do you think about in terms of your legacy and the mark you're going to leave on the university?
That is such a great question. Again, because when I was starting, I would say I had a vision, right, of the projects I was going to take on and the big picture issues that the college was going to address during my tenure. And of course, everything shifted once the pandemic arrived. But I do think, and your point is also a really good one in that I have confidence that I know how to manage through crisis, running a campus in Italy. I've been through my share of crises and worked through lots of different things, terrorism and student illness and student, really difficult things that have happened to students. But we had never faced anything quite so global. So on one level, I have confidence in my ability to make good decisions. And I always, ever since I've been young in my career, I've always done that in a very kind of collaborative and iterative way, often through discussion and asking questions of people and then rethinking my position, etc. But I've always had the confidence of knowing that because I have a pretty straightforward way of getting to an answer, but because I'm open minded and I can look at things from different perspectives and I can really be open minded to hearing opposite ideas, I knew that I could learn enough to make decisions that in the moment I thought would be the best decisions possible. The hardest part, though, was not being able to tell people around me, like our faculty, that were so anxious about going back into the classroom last fall when we made the decision to open the campus for in-person learning and living. I couldn't say to them, I guarantee you're going to be fine. The reality is we put in place all of the right structures and protocols, and they were fine. We had no cases of transmission in our classrooms, and very few cases altogether. But at the moment, I couldn't guarantee them that. And so, because they didn't know me well enough to know that I have what I believe to be a strong and confident ability to reach a good informed decision, that was a really hard thing to convince them to trust me in a moment where nobody was very trusting of anybody.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And you're such a role model, right? And you're paving the way. They say you can't be what you can't see. So when you think about the women and men, you think about the students at Allegheny College, and watching you during this time and watching you lead, make those tough decisions and kind of get the school through this period of time. Not only are you, creating a narrative around leadership, but you're doing really important work to ensure that the graduates of your institution are prepared to lead as well. What do you think about that, and how do you approach that in terms of the impact you're having on these students and the future impact they're going to have on this world?
So, I do think about it a fair amount, only in that it's been really heartwarming for female students in particular to say to me, I'm so excited that we have a woman president, right? It means something to them and also to many of our alumni. And I do, I am a role model in some ways for them, not just because I'm the first female president. I'm also a mother of 3 boys. So I'm a career woman and a working mother. And I often get people, both at Allegheny and other institutions that I've been at, who want to try to figure out how they can forge a similar path moving forward. So I do think a lot about that. And I think about the fact that I think if there's one takeaway that they've been able to see is that, um, you can be strong, but you can also be accessible, and you can be communicative, and you can be collaborative, right? That they have seen me puzzle through these really difficult challenges, and certainly all leaders in the last year and a half, I think, have gotten a lot of criticism from all kinds of stakeholders. But that if you're confident in yourself and you make informed collaborative decisions, that you don't back down. And I think they've seen that I set out to keep the institution open and to keep them all safe. And while they may not always have agreed with, some of the limitations we put on students in order to keep them safe, right? Or limitations about not having parents on campus because we really wanted to protect our community. In the end, I had a lot of people, even who might have criticized small decisions along the way, come back to me and say, thank you for everything you did, because I think people recognize it's not necessarily going to be perfect. You're going to make missteps along the way. But if you stick to your beliefs and your decision making process, people can trust that you're always going to try to do the right thing. And that, for me, is really important to show to both the women and the men on our campus, to give them the opportunity that they wanted when they chose to come to Allegheny. It would have been easier in many ways to say, we're just going to do all remote, we're going to protect everybody. But we believed that we could do this with a lot of help and collaboration. And so I think for them to see that their little college in Northwest Pennsylvania was able to do this successfully also gives them a real sense of boost and excitement and commitment to their college.
I'm sure it does. The world is changing so much now, where people work and how we work, the industries that are emerging, the innovation and technology. What advice do you have for your students as they head into that world? and, how to best kind of show up.
So it's really exciting for me to actually be at Allegheny in this moment, because what we know about this generation and future generations is that they want to dig in and try to solve big global issues. They want to do many things in their lives. They want to be many different things. We talk a lot about Gen Z, right? They don't want to just be a job. Frankly, they're all going to have probably 10 to 20 different careers, never mind jobs. And many of those don't even exist. And so I think it goes back to my idea, what I have always said, which is if you can find a passion or several passions, you should pursue those, because the world is going to continue to change at such a fast rate that if you can pull together multiple approaches or multiple disciplines or multiple ways of seeing the world, you're going to be able to see things differently and better than many other people who might be wedded to one approach or one discipline. So that's a big piece about what we speak to students about, this idea of kind of transdisciplinary, right? Like that you're going beyond the traditional disciplines and ways of knowing, because what we do know is that the world is going to keep changing beyond where it is now. So we don't even know the tools that we will need to solve the technological issues or solve the big climate issues or solve the big global health issues ahead. So kind of the more willing to step to the side and see the world from different perspectives, the better off they're going to be. And we happen to have a curriculum that's actually based on that, where students are required to have a major and minor in different disciplines. And what I really love talking to them about and really pushing students on is, how do you take those two things and interconnect them and actually arrive at a totally different view that is not one or the other, but something new?
Yeah, that's such great advice. I was double major in school, English and sociology, and I love it because it kind of marries for me, it was creative thinking, being able to, write concise arguments and positions on things, leaning into research and data and seeing how that, impacts and creates information about the world and the way that we live. And I, out of school went into investment banking, of course, as you do as an English sociology major. But
Of course.
what I realize, and which I still lean into today, and my biggest piece of advice is to, follow your passion for the topics that matter to you, because I think what we need is more diversity of thought, of experience, of education and knowledge in the workforce, because just like you're saying, we don't know where we're going. We don't know, the next innovation, the next role, the next industry, but being able to lean on different ways of approaching a problem and different, schools of thought is how we're going to get there. We need to kind of really encourage that diversity of thought and experience.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mentioned I'm a Renaissance Italian scholar, and what's so fascinating for me is the the models that I look to are actually the Renaissance thinkers, like Leonardo da Vinci or Galileo, right? Who was both an artist and a physicist, a scientist. And if he hadn't had both of those tools, he wouldn't have figured out with the telescope and with his way of mapping out the planets that we actually all revolve around the sun, that the world, everything doesn't revolve around the earth. Like, we take those things for granted, but it's so interesting because so much of higher education has actually gone in very specific disciplinary directions, right? With specific knowledge and expertise, which we've needed over the last 100 years or so to solve issues. But now I think what we need is that reconnection of completely different areas of thinking, because again, as we've said, we just don't know what's out in front. And so we need to be able to be nimble thinkers, and we need to train young people to be agile and nimble thinkers and learners and artists or scientists, because then they will have the agility and the flexibility to pivot quickly and to open their brains up to new ways of knowing. And that's what the world is going to need.
Yes, that is what the world is going to need. Dr. Link, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. It was such an honor to hear from you and to hear your story about leading during this time and to be inspired by the work that you're doing.
Well, thanks so much for a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes. Give us 5 stars and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.
92% of households that start the year with Peloton are still active a year later.
92% because of a bike?
Not just bikes. We also make treadmills and rowers.
Oh, let me guess, for elite athletes only, right?
Nope. It doesn't matter if you're an avid exerciser or new to working out. Peloton can help you achieve your fitness goals. 92% stick with it. So can you. Try Peloton bikes, tread, or row risk-free with a 30-day home trial. New members only. Not available in remote locations. See additional terms at onepeloton.com/home-trial.